welcome to everyone here and the people that are online joining us from many parts in the world. So thank you all for being with us. We appreciate your presence, your attention, and your contribution. My name is Holly Welcome-Radice, and I am the Senior Policy Advisor and Regional Representative for the Americas at the CALP Network, and I am pleased to be able to facilitate this panel. So we're going to examine in this panel what more we can do to make sure that cash assistance is systematically used in humanitarian response. This is a hybrid discussion, and it'll last about 50 minutes. And after this discussion, we'll open it up to you in the room and online. And at the end, we'll have a closing summary by our director, Kate Turton. So in the context of uncertainty and volatility, we cannot forget that choice and dignity for people in crisis are critical cornerstones for humanitarian response. And cash assistance is the best tool we have. People overwhelmingly prefer it, and it is 37% more efficient than resource transfers. Yet in recent years, we see really what is a mixed understanding if we're losing ground or not in terms of cash assistance in humanitarian response. So this panel will provide insights on how we can drive forward a new era of cash assistance, one that is grounded in a local context, capabilities, that is agile, and streamlined and leveraged funding from increasingly diverse sources. I'd like to say something that maybe you don't know, but the CALP network is a very diverse network as well. We have over 100 members that come from different parts representing the ecosystem of cash assistance. And this panel represents some of those different parts of the ecosystem. And now I'm going to introduce you to them. They bring a really rich perspective and insights on how we can gain momentum on cash. So first, we have to put her up on the screen. We have Carolyn Tetti, who is has 20 years experience working with nonprofits in Africa, and currently she works in Give Directly as the Vice President of Human-Centered Design and Advocacy. We have Ahmed Ibrahim Abdi, who is a humanitarian and development leader with over 30 years experience across the Horn of Africa, and he serves as the convener of the ASL Network, which is a platform of over 30 local and national organizations operating in Kenya's most disaster-affected counties. On my right is Gemma Connell, and she has worked for over 20 years in OCHA and in UNRWA in various roles, leading and supporting humanitarian responses in some of the most challenging crises in the world. And she currently serves as the officer in charge of the Humanitarian Sector Division and is the chief of OCHA's Strategic Prioritization and Practices branch at OCHA. Ambassador Dominic Stillhart, on my left, has served over 30 years in humanitarian action, including 30 with ICRC. And he is the Director of Humanitarian Aid at the Swiss Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as well as the Deputy Director General of the Swiss Development Cooperation. On the very end is Paul Musser, who has worked for over 30 years with payment systems in humanitarian and development contexts with the likes of Visa and MasterCard. And currently, he is the manager at Co-Action Global, which focuses on growth and impact created by the private sector and humanitarian alliance. So I think that's over 100 years of experience that we have on this panel. So it should be a pretty good one. I just have to figure out how to deal with this. And I'm going to call up Caroline, because she's going to kick us off in a little bit. But I am having a problem with this technical thing here, so I don't really
Yeah, we'll just have to carry on. There is additional IT support.
Okay, additional IT support. Excellent. So what we'll do is we'll say we're having 2 rounds of questions. This is the only panel I've seen with 2 rounds of questions, so we're going to get a lot out of these people. But each panelist, I just want you to know, you only have 5 minutes to respond in the first round. So I'm a pretty good timekeeper. That's like the American in me. And we have someone over there who's going to show you when you have 1 minute left, okay? Very gentle. So if you see that, please try to wrap up so we can have enough time to be able to talk with panelists. And our goal here is to hear solutions, not just problems. We've had enough of that. And I encourage you panelists to be forward-looking and be concrete. So, do we have the IT help to be able to? Okay, should I start then with the first panelist who's online? Caroline, do you hear me?
Yes, I hear you well, Holly.
Okay. Unfortunately, we can't see you, so we're going to visualize you. But you'll come
I'll be
by
in
the time we
video.
come to you next. We're having a technical side here.
Okay.
Okay, but you have a wonderful booming voice, and your point is the really critical one for us to start with. So we really want to center this in people. And so we want to hear from you, from your vast experience in Give Directly and beyond. What matters most to people in crisis when it comes to humanitarian assistance? So over to you, Caroline.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Holly. And it's a pleasure meeting everyone on the panel. And thank you, participants, for attending this session and for us to learn together. So when we talk about people in humanitarian context, we are talking about real lives, real experiences on a day-to-day basis. When people are in crisis, one thing which is for sure is that they are impacted in significant ways, in ways that cannot be defined as being compartmentalized into sectors, in which case, therefore, a human never has a water sector, health sector, education sector, livelihood sector, um, you know, um, whatever it is that we call sectors today. When people are in crisis, they're facing a situation which exposes them to lose control of their lives. And what matters to them is stability, getting themselves back to normalcy. And most times, the person who can get these people to normalcy is usually themselves. And therefore, humanitarian assistance, when we talk about people, it's about thinking about what people themselves, when they find themselves in crisis, can be able to do to bring themselves back to normalcy, back to stability, and back to control. Cash is one of the solutions in the humanitarian assistance, sector, which can be able to give people choice, dignity, and trust. When people are in crisis, they want to be able to make choices to get their lives back to stability, to be able to respond to their needs, because every family, every individual is impacted differently and would want to respond to the crisis differently. Cash, therefore, is a way of helping them gain that choice and be able to get that stability. And when we think about, humanitarian assistance, when people find themselves in crisis, most times they feel vulnerable. They can also face stigma, and they can feel uprooted from their dignity and from their trust. And therefore, when we are giving assistance, we want to start looking at what is the ways of helping people to get back their dignity, to make sure that they feel being a part of what they're doing is a solution to what matters, not just to themselves, but also to the world that has come into contact with them. Cash is one response that helps us to deliver that dignity and that trust fast, because people don't have time when they're in crisis. When you are in crisis, you want to solve your challenges immediately and get back to normalcy as quickly as possible. At Give Directly, one of the things that we are doing is implementing emergency cash that will be able to build more trust, more choice, and more dignity, but most important, at speed. This is an ambitious project that aims to deliver unconditional cash to people in crisis within 5 to 7 days. And today in the room in person is my colleague, Michael Lillis. If anyone would want to talk about this ambitious dream of Give Directly, please do reach out to Michael and speak to him. Finally, one thing that I would want to say is we should remember that as we think about cash, this solution that has lots of evidence, which is preferred by most people in crisis, when we make the decision to deliver cash, we actually are making trade-offs. It is not a solution that is without pain points. And today's discussion, it will be very important for us to look at those pain points, discuss candidly. What does it mean to just give people cash? It means that we may be killing some of the funding silos that we've had in the humanitarian sectors for years. It might be killing some of the structures and systems that we have built. It might be killing some of the prestige that we have built as institutions around ourselves. And it might be calling us to shift power and let people be at the center of decision making. That can be very uneasy. And today, as we speak and as we discuss this, after the reset, we want to ask ourselves, is it important for us to exalt them ourselves as institutions, to exalt our structures and our systems? Or is it important for us to have the confidence that people feel dignified, feel trusted, and feel respected in humanitarian action? That, Holly, in my opinion, is where we should be starting when we are defining the success of humanitarian assistance and how impact is measured. Thank you.
I love everything about what you said, and it leads really nicely into our next panelist. You're talking about the need for things to be immediate, things to be able to, for people to be able to stabilize in their lives and find a solution that works for them, and that cash can really contribute to that. One point I want to pick up on is how we are looking at shifting power. And one of the things we've heard over and over in this event is related to locally led response, localization, local and national actors, right? So Ahmed, I'm going to come to you on this one. So the members of your network have been delivering cash, for cash assistance for many years. And so if you can tell us what are 3 things that your network does to drive locally led cash assistance. Over to you, Ahmed.
Yeah, thank you very much.
If I may, though, too, please, all speakers, can you speak close to the mics? I think some of our colleagues online are having problems hearing us. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. I can hear myself. Great. So I'm Ahmed, as already said. The ASAL Humanitarian Network works in 10 ASAL counties of Kenya, almost 60% of the landmass. It's called ASAL, means arid and semi-arid. So these are dry lands. It is hit by so many hazards, from drought to floods to disease outbreaks. Sometimes the COVID invasion, the whole of COVID, and then we had locusts. So during this journey, I'm going to paint a little bit of a picture. We came together in 2019 after we looked at Kenya. Kenya has a devolved government system of 47 governors with one central president. In that process, it means devolution brings more resources closer to communities and through their elected leaders. However, for local actors in that kind of a space, we analyzed our strengths and looked at the role of civil society. And we came up with, in a convened space for ourselves, 4 things that we thought was critical in certain areas like that. One was to look at active citizenship, means working with the government through their budgeting and processes and people and what they want. The second one we looked at was women and how economic empowerment, and these things really sets them free, but also they were not part of leadership. Thirdly, we looked at the region, and there was a lot of conflict and insecurity, and therefore we looked at peace building as a key driver of development. Or if there's no development, there's insecurity. So we looked at it like that. And then finally, in the constitution, there was something called equalization fund. It meant that all those regions that were far behind, 14 of them were supposed to be given a certain % of the budget per year to be able to bring them up to speed. Within that kind of a setup, when we looked at all that, then we said a single local organization running around will not make a difference. So we came together to form now the network. So because it was a collision of the willing, then we looked at how best can we do work. And then we came up with harmonized models as our selling point. So harmonized models means how can we be able to amplify local voices, do locally led action, and how can we make the humanitarian system effective for people in crisis. So in that process, then we came up with cash as the first thing. How we did the analysis, and we found that out of those 10 counties, how we normally work is we do an analysis of all the information we get to prioritize the severity in each of those counties and say county X, Y, Z is in crisis. So from that perspective, that analysis we present to different partners and then say, we want to walk this talk. We don't have resources. Can you be able to work with us? So from that process, then we were able to really fast track the 8-step cash transfer programming. And over time, we invited INGOs who, with the support of one or two INGOs, we started working that by training the local actors, by being able to go the processes, and then we asked them to invite an institutional donor. So we took the institutional donor for a field visit twice or three times. That was ECHO. And since then, 2019, to today, as we are talking, we have been able to get sustained funding from ECHO through now the INGOs, because we came up with the models that were able to really help. So two things were critical for us to really make the cash work. One was to make sure the infrastructure existed in local partners to be able to do digital cash transfers. From that perspective, then we were really home in how to really get the last point for local actors to press the button to have local communities. Secondly, local actors were thought to be biased. So we came out with a locality targeting tool, which now described which villages were to be targeted. And then finally, the community-based targeting model, we layered it with what we called a verification, scientific verification, to be able to check if this village, the community registered groups are the right people to really. And if it didn't reach 90% of the people, whether in poor or borderline kind of food insecurity, then that targeting was repeated. And in summing up to really how we have worked it, we were able to also use this method to bring in more resources, like leveraging together with the ECHO funds, Athanif Resources Foundation, and a number of other sources to be able to layer it in. And as we were doing the scale up of the 2021, it also informed the first flash appeal, which that time Gemma was there. And luckily, in one of the ports that we had for localization, the Kenyan port for SAF, we only got it because localization was added into as a clause of 8 million. And out of that, we were able to get 1.2 million out of it. And that's how Cash has been able to support us walk the talk. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you said more than 3, and that's amazing. Talking about harmonized models, working through the governments, you talked about making sure about digital infrastructure, and I really loved how you're like, we're bringing the donor here to see what we can do, and that really to help to show what you guys are doing is important. Well, you were just talking about Gemma, so we're going to move on to her. So after you've heard what Ahmed said, you've heard what Caroline said, and you know that the evidence is clear about cash. So what I'd like you to talk about is what is holding cash back right now at this critical juncture. This is what we've been talking about in this whole, for the past few days. So what is holding it back and what needs to change to move it to the center of humanitarian response? So over to you.
Thank you so much, and such a privilege to be with you, Ahmed. I think that's actually a story that tells how we can overcome barriers, which was sometimes you have to almost stage a coup on a process. So when we were in the middle of the drought, as Ahmed said, we managed to get a surf allocation. Now, many of you in the room know that surf usually goes to UN agencies, does go to UN agencies, and rarely would make its way to a local actor. But the ASAL Humanitarian Network was doing such a phenomenal response. And everywhere that we went in Kenya, people said they wanted 2 things. One was multi-purpose cash, and one was school feeding for the children so that they could survive the drought and have one less mouth to feed at home. And so when we did the surf, we basically said, this is what people have said. And Ahmed and the network had all of the data, all of the feedback from all of the consultations, and that was how we did it, because otherwise we would have gone into the process of this sector wants this, that sector wants that, let's have a discussion. And there was a lot of blowback that we had to deal with around it, but we were crystal clear that this is what people wanted, and so the money went, and we found an arrangement to go through an intermediary in the system to get it to the network, and the rest speaks for itself in terms of what Ahmed and the whole network have done. So what are the barriers that stop that kind of thing from happening every day in every operation? I think there's a number. There's the barriers that we speak about all of the time. There's the political barriers, which is we do have governments that restrict or oppose cash programming. And sadly, we've had more in recent years because of different reasons in countries. And that's a barrier that we need to overcome with advocacy, with engagement, with awareness raising. So that's a barrier. That's a barrier that we speak about a lot. The second one is a barrier that no matter the evidence, we still have to overcome the narrative that cash is somehow more risky than any other type of humanitarian response. No matter the data, no matter the delivery, we still have to overcome this, when in reality, we know that cash often has fewer intermediaries, often has stronger digital traceability, often has a lighter footprint and large supply chains, so it's less risky on so many levels. But that is a barrier, is the continued perception around the risks associated with cash. The second, I think Caroline elaborated them perfectly, so I won't go back into them, but it's the barriers that are around how are we structured as a system, what are the vested interests, and how does multi-purpose cash challenge them. Most of our organizations were built around logistics, supply chains, and procurement. That was the way that humanitarian action was constructed. Cash fundamentally challenges that model. Cash also challenges how we coordinate responses. As Caroline said, we coordinate responses primarily through sectors. There's good reason for that. We need sectoral standards. Most of the governments that we work with are sector-based, so that's important. But it challenges our coordination because multi-purpose cash, in particular, doesn't sit with any one cluster, nor should it. So it challenges us to coordinate differently. It also challenges us to look at how we overcome the narrative that cash is harder in the most complex environments. When we know, for example, in Gaza, that just weeks after the ceasefire, it was cash that first got to people when so much else couldn't. So we have barriers in our system and a mindset and a structural challenge in our system that we need to overcome. But the last one that I'll speak to, which I actually think can overcome all of that, is funding. So what do I mean here? If we look at our imperfect, but the best we have available data from the Financial Tracking Service, around 9% of humanitarian funding was delivered through cash last year. 9%. We hear very regularly that donors support cash, that donors support multi-purpose cash, that donors are on board with it, they believe in it, they're convinced about it, and yet the funding that we see in the system does not speak to that. So we have to tackle that, and we have to tackle that honestly and openly and see what it would take to truly shift the dial. The second thing we have to be honest about is that the funding we have available is not enough. And that poses a very fundamental challenge, in particular to multi-purpose cash, because what we're seeing is in the vast majority of operations, funding is not enough, and partners are having to take excruciating decisions, including cutting the amount that they're going to transfer to a person. So what began as something that brings dignity becomes something that just puts onto that person the hard choices. What are you going to spend half of the minimum expenditure basket on? Because it's not going to deliver what you actually need. We have to take hard choices in that respect as to whether we reach more people with less or fewer people with what they need. And that's a fundamental dilemma that we have to tackle as a system. And Holly, I know I need to go back to you. I think the last point that I would say is just we know cash works. We've got all the evidence. We've got all of the research. We've got all of the data. We know what the barriers are. I was on a similar panel last year and we talked through the same barriers. So what is it that's going to fundamentally shift the dial? I implore donors to shift the way they fund. And at OCHA, we're looking at that seriously in terms of the way that we fund. So let me stop there. But the barriers are there, but as Ahmed, sitting right beside me, in real lived experience proves, they can be overcome. And not only can they must be, because the people we serve rely upon us to overcome those barriers to deliver the thing that they repeatedly request they want, prefer, and need. Thank you.
Okay, I got the message you can't hear out of that mic, so I'm going to lean over in a very uncomfortable way so you can hear me online. Gemma, a couple things that you said in there. One is that we listened to what people wanted and we did it. That's critical. And I also wanted to point out that it's not always about cash, right? It is about school feeding because we need to understand what the needs are in a community. I loved the idea of staging a coup as well, but that was on this side. I did want to say that figure in FTS, we know FTS isn't perfect. The numbers, according to our figures, it's about 20%. That's another structural issue, but 20% is still not great either. So we talked about mindset, we talked about structure, and we talked about funding. So guess what? Dominic, we're coming to you. So what concrete change in policy or financing could Switzerland or other donors advance in the coming year to accelerate progress for cash responses? So over to you, Dominic.
I have no cash. Okay, thanks a lot. Look, it seems to me like on so many other issues, the policy framework is all here, not least with the common donor approach to humanitarian cash assistance that was launched and signed by many donors, including ourselves, last year. In 2025, many donors, including ourselves, we have our own cash policies. The issue, so therefore the issue is not one of having the frameworks and the policies. Once again, the issue is the gap between commitments and reality. And that gap, even though you seem not entirely sure whether it is actually growing with the funding crunch, but according to our information, it's not getting better. The amount, it's not about the amount, but even the relative amount of cash in the system is not growing. So the easy answer is, of course, what can we do differently? It is funding more ambitiously cash programming. That is the easy answer. So why is it not happening? Okay, why is it not? It is happening to some extent. I think we are also at around 20%. But I think one of the things that we should realize, and I said it the other evening at the CALP reception, yes, the evidence is there, the research is there. Even, by the way, on poverty reduction, multi-purpose cash assistance is among the strongest instruments that we have, so in the long-term poverty reduction. But there is this persistent suspicion that cash is actually, we don't know exactly what people are doing, although the evidence is showing all the opposite. And let's look at ourselves, our sector. How long did it take for our own sector to actually come to believe in the evidence that was in front of us? It's not like, for decades we had been saying cash is the best instrument to address humanitarian crisis because of dignity. It gives people. We also had our own suspicions. Are they then really these people? Are they using the cash in the best? Yeah, actually they do. Evidence is there. So now we are talking among the like-minded, the converted. But there is a lot of, I speak a lot to Parliament here in Switzerland. I am convinced that 75% of our parliamentarians, they would not come to the same, despite the evidence, they probably don't even know the evidence, but there is the same suspicion about. So my first point here is to say what needs to be done. We need to make the case not among ourselves. We need to make the case to those who hold the strings to the purse. It's Parliament that gives us the money. So, and let's not take it for granted that everybody is aware of the evidence and believes in this evidence. We need to make that case, not to ourselves, but to those who are funding us. And if I'm saying those who are funding us, We are the Swiss Development Corporation. So those who are funding us are actually Parliament. So we need to make the case to our Parliament. Secondly, and Ahmed, you mentioned this. You said we need to invest in the infrastructure of local actors. The power shift also has to take place here. For cash programming requires local partnerships for delivery, local financial service providers, community engagement for targeting, and so on and so forth. So we need to invest in that kind of infrastructure that you built in Kenya. And if that infrastructure is not there, yeah, we will go back to food and trucks and all of the things that we love so much, and you can take pictures and so on and so forth. And the last point is perhaps now with pooled funds really playing an increasingly important role. We should have a conversation, Gemma, about the amount, how much of these pooled funds should actually. What is the target of pooled funds that should go to cash? My understanding is that it is below average now. It is below the 18 or 20%. I think it's around 16%. So maybe we can also set targets for pooled funds. How much should go into cash programming?
Wow, you just dropped the mic, so I needed to pick it up. Thank you for mentioning the common donor approach. For those of you online or in the room that don't know about it, check it out. Really important stance for many donors. And I really love your point about not talking to the converted and talking to the people that are making decisions with money, and how do we as a network really get in to be able to do that. So we're going to move on to another part of the ecosystem. I do want to recognize that, Paul, you stepped in at the last minute. Our other panelist fell ill, and so thank you. You're amazing. And you're going to represent something that is, really critical in terms of how we can do cash assistance. And it is related to the private sector. It's related to payments. So, Paul, you see, as working with the private sector, see behind the systems behind the scenes. So why is humanitarian cash slow and fragmented? Maybe it's multiple accounts, maybe it's duplicate onboarding, maybe it's siloed systems, maybe it's things I don't understand. And what would be a more efficient model, what could be a more efficient model from a private sector perspective?
Good morning, everyone. So let's start with a fact. I'm not very diplomatic. And so I'm going to ask you, if you're a implementing agency or a funder, raise your hand. Come on. If you give cash, give in kind, or fund it, raise your hand. All right, look around. To everybody who's got their hand raised, the answer to your question is the reason why we have registration duplication, multiple accounts, siloed systems is because of you. Sorry, it's a fact. It is not from the payment system. It's not from your technology providers. It is because you have not made the decision to stop doing it. Pure and simple, right? And that may be because, I don't know, you're a funder and you haven't written a good grant process that mandated that the funding from other grantors was joined. Or maybe you're an implementing partner and you're in the cash working group and you haven't been going out to the bar with all the other implementers and working out a deal. All right? Or maybe you have somebody on your privacy team who's afraid of having data shared. Or I can think of a dozen different reasons. But not one of those are your technology partners. Right? That is a decision that you've made to not do it in a comprehensive, collaborative fashion. Right? The technology is not the the end point of the decision that you make. And that's a difficult decision, and I understand that there's lots of reasons for it. But if you want to get away from the fact that somebody has to be interviewed 15 times, if you want to get away from the fact that there is registration databases scattered all over the place, if you want to get away from the fact that there are 13 different modalities, either cards in my pocket or mobile phones or whatever else, for the same family, that's your choice. And it is possible, right? So let's be absolutely clear. It is possible to do. You just have to make the choice to do it, right? So I'm going to give you an example that has nothing to do with you, but is a much larger problem. So I am from the States, California. California has 58 counties running 8 different social services programs, some of them highly sensitive, for example, support to trafficked women, food stamps, healthcare programs. So a variety of programs. For many, many years, every one of those counties decided exactly what their own policy was, their own application. They created 58 separate applications, 58 separate interviews for each one of those programs. It took them 10 years, but they consolidated onto one application online, right? It was extraordinarily painful, all right? But I have family members, and I can speak to this firsthand, who have applied to those programs, and they have gone from doing it a number of years ago, where it took an hour and a half plus 3 interviews, to 15 minutes in 1 interview. So if your client or customer is important to you, you will ask yourself, how do I work with the NGO next to me, the implementing partner next to me, to not force them to duplicate the activity? All right? There are tools on the technology side that can make it easier, but you need to make the political decision to begin with, that you're going to work together.
Well, okay, I love that. I love being provocative, so thank you for that. You know, the decision is with us. We're saying that cash is about decision-making and agency, so maybe that's also about us as implementers and funders as well. And that example from California was really useful. We're going to move into the second round, but something I keep writing in my notes and forgetting to say is that we actually have a report that was just released. It's on risk of diversion in cash, something that we can share with you. It's basically trying to dispel the same myths that we've heard for years. Gemma mentioned it, Dominic mentioned it. So it's up on our website, and it will be translated soon into French, Arabic, and Spanish. Okay, you guys ready for round 2? Gemma, you're going to come up. But because we had a lovely conversation, you only have 3 minutes, people. So we're going to be focused. We're going to be focused. So this is an easy one in 3 minutes, Gemma.
Is it?
Yes. What is OCHA's vision and role in catalyzing and coordinating a new era of cash?
Doing it. Okay, in 3 minutes or less. So number 1, making sure that cash is visible, which is to say that it is planned, that it is monitored, and that we're accountable around it. Would you believe that in 2023, only 5 humanitarian response plans globally had a dedicated section on cash? 2023. 2025, 21, all of them. So that's on OCHA, right? That's on OCHA with the system. That was work that the CAG supported, the Cash Advisory Group globally, guidance that was developed. But cash was, up until 2 years ago, invisible in the vast majority of coordinated plans and appeals. So that's one piece that's on us that we've got to do. Second piece, monitoring. How do people's preferences and priorities translate into the response that we deliver? This is a piece that we have not managed to hold ourselves accountable meaningfully to. We have a lot of conversations about doing it. We have a lot of ideas about how to do it. We have said for this year, we are determined, and many of my colleagues in the room are working on this, from AAP to the colleagues who work work on cash, that when we have the data, and we have the data, 93% of households in Gaza prefer unrestricted cash, 94% of communities in Yemen prefer cash over in-kind. We have the data. How do we hold ourselves to account around what we're delivering and why we're not making that shift? And that's a piece where response monitoring and the role of OCHA is incredibly important. So we're going to be doing that. Secondly, how do we ensure that we are driving cash coordination in a way that is meaningful, that is inclusive? I take the challenge, I take the point, and where, again, we challenge ourselves. We do not have money. We are a sector that is in collapse, and the people who rely upon us are depending on us to do better at the simple things like deduplication. So cash working groups have a critical role to play there. That's not just OCHA, that's the programmatic co-chair and others. It's a joint effort, but we've got to do it. So adapting cash coordination to be meaningful, to have impact, and to really get to the heart of conversations, because we have them, but we struggle with translating them into action. And the last one, to pick up Dominique's challenge, is using our pooled funds. So we now have, it's 16% and 17% respectively from CBPF and SURF, but that masks big differences. In Yemen and Myanmar, for example, cash was about 32% of pooled fund allocations. We've got good practice. We need to take that good practice, we need to build on it, we need to hold ourselves to account. But Dominique, I would take that challenge and turn the challenge back, which is this can't just be about the pooled funds. It has to be about donors collectively. The pooled funds are currently a relatively small proportion of humanitarian funding. We can do everything in our power. We should, we must, but other donors also have to step up to the plate, because that is the majority of the share of the response. And the last piece is just a good, because I think we need some positive. The world is awful and we are struggling. There is positive. Anticipatory action. Cash is over 40% of the funds we deliver through our anticipatory action frameworks. Over 40%. We've got good practice. Let's take it. Let's build. Let's grow it. So making it visible, holding ourselves to accountable, especially on people's priorities and preferences, using coordination to be meaningful, escalating where we hit barriers, and then using the pooled funds in a meaningful way.
Okay, amazing. I didn't have to summarize because you did it for me. Thank you for mentioning anticipatory action, because it hasn't come up yet. Another shameless plug for something that CALP is doing. We're actually doing some research right now on looking at what came out of multi-needs assessments and what actually happened in response in terms of cash. So that's something, again, honoring what you're talking about, honoring what people say that they want and what is actually happening. And I see you, Chris. So, and you just had a challenge for Dominic, so I'm going to bring another question to him, another challenge. So we're talking about policy still. Let's go there and say more broadly in policy decisions rather than technical fixes, because I know someone at your level doesn't want to talk about MEB, doesn't want to talk about technical things. So at a high political level, policy level, what is required to ensure that there is better and faster aid, which includes cash assistance, and that it's not sidelined?
Well, I think first, for me, it's important also to ask ourselves, why is it that cash is getting sidelined? And Gemma, you mentioned a few of the barriers, and especially in a period of austerity, if you have to cut your programming, what is the easiest to cut? I mean, I think also you said it's all the humanitarian system was built around logistics, supply chains, warehousing, and all. So if you have a logistics pipeline, if you take WFP, you have less funding. There is a lot that is already there. It is not easy to cut fast. Whereas with cash, cash very often is just a line item before it is dispersed. So that's the easiest to cut. So that is one of the main reasons why also I believe in times of austerity, cash is often the first kind of victim. So what needs to change? I'm afraid it's relatively simple and yet difficult to do. I mean, one of the things that we've been discussing at the Swiss Development Corporation is cash as a default. Why not instead of why cash? Why should you do a cash program in Yemen? The answer should rather be why not cash? The question should rather be why not cash? So cash as a default. Secondly, and this links up a little bit to the whole anticipatory action piece, we need to invest in preparedness. I said before, you know, in order to make sure that we can deliver cash quickly, we need to invest in preparedness, registration system, financial service provider contracts, government approvals, registration. So an infrastructure needs to be there in order for us not to have the excuse that it is easier to buy a few bags of food than mount a cash program. And the last point is basically back to what I said before. We need to make the case for cash, because cash is what people want, because with cash it is exactly, we offer people the opportunity to look after themselves. So if we are serious about a more people-centric humanitarian action, cash is definitely, perhaps not the only, but probably the most important instrument that we have.
Lots of agreement up here on the panel on that. We know it's easy to scale, which is great, and easily could be scaled back. But going to that question of like, cash is what is going to be our default. And love the comment on preparedness, which is difficult in the time where we are now, where we're just thinking about how can we get money to implement, but we need to be able to make sure that we have the infrastructure, the skills, and the understanding in the communities. And so connecting to that, of course, is private sector. So I'm coming back to you, Paul. So private sector partners often are the ones moving the money, generally. What can humanitarian actors do differently to collaborate with the companies, with the ones that you work with, to do it earlier? So that goes to preparedness, of course. Yeah. So before they're designed. And this can eventually, hopefully, you know, the aim is to reduce costs and improve delivery. So tell us about that in 3 minutes or less.
In 3 minutes? All right. So take your pen and write these following 4 words. Calendar, off-ramp, form factor, ROI. If you do those 4 things, you're way ahead of the curve and your program will most likely succeed. Why? Calendar. If you're not planning in advance, if you're not building infrastructure and you're trying to do it at the last minute, the chances that it's going to cost you a fortune or simply fail goes up drastically. There is no payment system that's designed to turn on a dime. Sorry, they're not designed that way, right? There are lots of good ways to drop money quickly, right? Remittances is a good example, but the fact is if you want a highly organized system, you need a calendar and it needs to be more than a few days. Off-ramps. Everybody is going to tell you that they've got a brand new technology. The first question you ask is, how does my client get the money? Right? The off-ramp. I can send you money 1,000 different ways, but you need to be able to get it. Right? Secondly, form factor, which is married without divorce to the off-ramp. Right? If you don't think through your form factor before you start launching a program, before you fall in love with the idea, you are absolutely going to fail. Delivering cards in remote places is dang hard, right? Mobile money works great unless there's no connectivity, right? You need to think about the form factor in the hand of the person that needs the money. And the final thing is ROI. Your technology partners are not in love with you. They do this as a business. And they have to answer to their stakeholders, usually an executive who is already a little skeptical of that he's already assigning people to this project, about what is the return on this investment. Here's the last thing about that. The worst thing to destroy an ROI is not the technology. It is the lack of planning, right? The more you have to go through multiple iterations of, really, you want that? But that's not what you told me last week, is the more likely you have just destroyed all the profitability of that program for your technology provider. And more likely, they will not deliver what you want. So, If you're not worried about the calendar or off-ramps or form factors or the ROI, then let me just put it this way. You need to find your service provider, talk to them early, often, frankly, and please be realistic. That's it.
Okay, you got the 4 things and you've had your heart broken. Financial service providers not in love with you, so.
Can I ask a question? Can I ask a question, please?
Can we?
Dominic, disruptive.
Are you going to disrupt my flow? We were right on time, Dominic.
Yeah, but we are here to disrupt.
You can, okay, if you'll be quick. Ahmed, are you okay with that? Because you're next. Okay, we'll give you 1 minute.
I'll get my time.
Look at his time. Okay, you go. I'll give you 1
No,
minute.
but he is very quick. No, I got the love story, or that it is not a love story. I got the ROI, but the form factor, I'm sorry, I didn't get that point.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, so the...
that's 2 words, not 1.
you know... So it's off-ramp for that matter, but I'm just going to hang on. All right, so it's actually 6 words that you needed to know. All right, so the form factor is the device that you're holding in your hand, whether it's the phone or the card or cash or whatever, voucher or whatever else.
We'd call that delivery
So less
mechanism.
than a minute. Huh?
You see? Excellent. And we're loving that. Okay. But Ahmed, we're coming to you. We've talked about policy, we've talked about structure, we've talked about systems, donor delivery mechanisms, anything we want here. So, but what we really want to know, we want to talk about how are we making locally led response more and more feasible and better quality. So what really needs to change, what genuinely needs to change so that local and national actors can lead in cash responses?
Yeah, so the first key thing that local actors need, and as long as the whole process that has been talked about, the compliance has been ticked. And it has been done by both parties, the person giving the money and the implementing entity. I don't see the reason why what we call the first mile can't be done by a local actor. And because of that work we did, Cash has been walking the talk of localization agenda. And if you really want to push that agenda well with local actors, Cash will be the most appropriate way to test it. And I'm sure you'll succeed. So that is the first one. The second other key aspect that I thought will be very critical is there's need to be a proper joint market monitoring mechanism in place. If that is not going to be able to really give us what the people in crisis really need, then we will not be able to really deliver it well. So that joint market monitoring, where local actors at the forefront can help in that data collection on a continuous way, will be able to really help it function. So that when that household is saying, this is the minimum food basket, it is the minimum food basket. And you can't do a blanket rate. That is the fight we have in the cash technical working groups about the issue of, in the ASALs, different counties are at different levels. So when one major actor comes who leads the food security cluster and says we are doing a blanket rate across those, then we are up in fighting. So that household needs need to be met, and if you change it, then it's not easy. So the coordination and whatever we agree on, then if you lead it, we want co-leadership, then that way it really is going to be impactful to the first mile. And then finally, this is the best way to leverage resources. For example, in the ASAL regions, almost all those counties have disaster risk management funding. So 2% of their budget is already in that. Bringing the government to the forefront and layering it on an alert-based mechanism, which is triggered together, now layers in the ability of all the different actors with crisis modifiers to plug in. You just have to do it with your partners. But as long as cash technical working groups are working, we can be able to really demonstrate that cash is really doing the first mile very well.
This is the most succinct panel who says amazing things. Making sure that local and national actors are in leadership, that they're there in being able to analyze the context. And the point about leveraging funding at the government level is critical, especially now when we have not much funding. So, Caroline, are you still with us? You've been hearing everything everyone is saying.
Yes, yes.
Can we see
I
you?
am still here with us.
Okay, you heard all of that. You opened us. And, this is really, that we opened with people and we want to close with people because we talk about systems, we talk about whatever, but really it's all about people. And you have a rich experience in Give Directly. You guys are always looking at this topic. So at the end of the day, that's who we want to be talking about and that's who we're serving. So with your 3 minutes, what is one thing that people in this physical room and those in the virtual room with you, what they need to remember so that we're genuinely putting people first when we're doing responses and particularly responses with cash? Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So when we're thinking about shifting, putting people first, we should think about shifting power. And I wouldn't ask anybody to raise their hands, but I'd want us to, reflect within yourself where you are in your organization. When you think about localization, how does it feel like? Does it feel like letting people be at the forefront of decision making? Do you genuinely do it? That is what putting people first means. And it makes us feel very uneasy, but it is the right thing to do. And it is the power that enables us to redefine success in the humanitarian sector. Until we are able to enable people, we are able to let go and let people make choices about their lives. We are able to give back dignity to people. We are able to trust them with the resources that we think can change their lives. Then we will be struggling to define success in the sector and will be struggling to define what putting people first means. And we know we don't have to overemphasize this. Multipurpose cash or unconditional cash is that tool that enables us to give our hands off and let people be in control, because we have resources coming from donors and we can be able to sit with donors and tell them, trust us because we trust the people we are going to give this money, and then trust them because we believe they know what this money can do to their lives. It starts with giving up power and shifting power from us to the people we are serving.
Oh, well, that was less than 3 minutes. So Ahmed wants to take the rest of your time. Your point of power is incredible. And we're going to give power over back to you, Ahmed.
So thank you. I think the money we are talking about is people's aid to people in need. Mm-hmm. So if you are in between, you are either an enabler or a barrier or a blocker. So you need to smarten up to ensure that that money from people who have aid, for their money to reach the people in need. Thank you.
What else am I going to say to that? Get out of the way. So, all right, I'm going to get out of the way right now, and we're going to turn this over to you all. We've come to questions. So now we have a bit of an issue with the microphone. You guys can't hear it online, so we may repeat. So my colleague Lynn Yoshikawa, who's the head of network development, is moving in the room, and we have colleagues online who are also feeding us some questions. I did want to note that we have a lot of people from Europe, people from the Middle East, and really want to recognize for those that are there, thank you so much for joining in this difficult time. And I'm impressed there are people from North America and the Americas at large. Thank you, people, for waking up so early. Folks from Africa that are joining us. So lots of interesting perspectives and backgrounds that are in the room and also in the virtual room. So when you are asking your question, please try to be concise so we can have as many questions as possible. Let us know your name and who you're working for. So Lynn, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Yeah, we'll take maybe a few questions at a time. Can those online hear us? Give us a thumbs up. Handing over.
If you can't hear, let us know. Online, we'll be checking the chat, and I'll just repeat.
So this is Faiza from Yemen. I have 3 points maybe to consider. The first point is about the budget of cash, I agree with Jema. That is why the pool fund is the list, like pool fund that is having budget for cash. And we experience from Yemen, like when we have a cash program with other, let's say, agencies from other donors, but you need the pool fund. One of the practice that is not, supporting localization is what is happening. That is the budget of cash is remain within that UN agency, and local NGOs having the most fewest amount, where we do all assessment and preparing the list of people and even observing the distribution, but the transformation going through the UN agency. And that's why that's the reason. That is because to keep the bigger money, the budget within the UN, so they get a bigger head, let's say, overhead cost and operation cost. So it's like from localization perspective, so we need to be very honest to discuss that. Like we will not handle the whole work, just, the money is staying within the UN just to get a bigger, overhead cost. The second point is about also another experience that is, personally, I don't think that cash assistance shouldn't be long, because we experience when we have a project with WFP, it's a graduation approach. It was a kind of 2 years people receiving cash assistance. And when you start try to transition them, they didn't accept to a business model. They say, okay, maybe we succeed, maybe we will not. So it's safer to continue having the cash assistant rather than taking the risk to have a business and we fail in that. So caring while we're doing cash, be careful about stop creating dependency. Instead, we can take it as a pathway to creating independency and resilience among people. And here, I would suggest the partnership with banking systems. For example, banking system in Yemen are willing to collaborate, but they also want to benefit. So like at least they say, okay, if we're gonna to contribute on that, we want more people who are dealing with our banking system. So we have a kind of financials, client who are dealing with the system. And here we need to find a way, a kind of piloting something where we can collaborate with banking system in different contexts and doing a kind of a cash assistant in a sustained way that creating a kind of job. And also everyone is getting wing. People be independent, banking system is being stronger, because even as much as banking system is in any country is stronger, this is positively reflecting in all other, let's say partnership chains. Thank you.
Okay, so Faiza, we got 2 questions out of you, and I'm going to hold on to that until we get one more question. So don't forget to introduce yourself and try to keep it to 1 question.
Hello.
But she's a rock star, so I was going to give her like 5. So.
Hi, James from WJR. Is there a risk with preaching to the choir? We've said we need to advocate for cash, so I'd love to hear what are the realistic and fairly savage criticisms Dominique and Paul would say that their parliaments and private sector partners would have of cash, and how would the rest of the panel realistically address those arguments? Let's not just be vague. How would we do it?
Great. So we have, let's take, because there's 3 questions there, so, and then maybe we'll go to online. So we have a question which was related to the issue of budgets in the pooled funds. And Gemma, maybe you can take that one. Paul, there was a question related to banking. Maybe if you want to talk about potentials for financial inclusion. And also anything, Ahmed, if you want to touch on that one as well, like linking to larger like services within a community. And then there was the specific question about, okay, what are, that risk of preaching to the choir. So, and specifically was to you, Paul, and to Dominique, but anyone else can come in on that. So you want to go ahead, Gemma?
No, I think Faiza's point was more that the pooled funds are a small part of the big picture, but I also think this point around overhead is hugely important. And Tom Fletcher recently in a lot of discussions has called for radical transparency. And I think that that's hugely important, which is to say, what information are we sharing about these pieces? Because we know that when this is looked into, I think it was Share Trust that did some fascinating work with Refugees International and others on the pooled fund. There's 3 pooled funds, Ukraine, Nigeria, and one other that's escaping my mind, Sudan, where they've looked at how the pooled funds, the flow through, the overheads, et cetera, and how much more efficient it is to deliver directly through local actors. At the same time, we're an ecosystem. And so how do we balance this, I think, is a hugely complex, very, very challenging, almost existential question for us as a system that we have to grapple with directly. I did just want to quickly also touch on this question of preaching to the choir and the arguments. And I think we have to be very blunt in a room like this. In the discussions that I've had in the last year with donors, when you can get them to finally stop talking about how we all agree and get to why aren't we getting there. You know, one of the perceptions is at a time that people around the world are struggling, that costs of living are rising, that many countries, including current donor countries, are cutting back on their own social safety nets, social protection systems. Why would we fund a social safety net for people in some other part of the world when we can't do it for our own people? And I think that's something that we have to grapple with, right? Because the reality is that survey upon survey shows that people support giving to other people in crisis. To Ahmed's point, we have to cut out all of the layers to make sure that's direct as possible, but people support it. But to Dominique's earlier point, I do think we've educated ourselves. It took probably 20 years. We educated ourselves. We've educated one another. We've had those discussions. But our conversations with the people who ultimately are the taxpayers, who are the source of the money that we use to give to people, has been far less on this topic. So I think we have to be open and honest about the state of the world, about the state of people, but also do a far better job of saying, I mean, back last year, and I know there's been a lot of discussion this week on prioritization, someone said to me, is cash life-saving? If someone has a life-threatening need, giving them cash to meet that need is life-saving. But if we're asking that question as a humanitarian community, imagine what a person is asking out there on the street. So that would be my contribution to that question.
Okay, who next?
You want to go, Dominic? You want to go?
Yeah, let me
Go.
Yeah, go.
Yeah, so for the way I look at the parliaments is in every round of a new parliamentary coming in, I think there are core groups that you really want to influence. And maybe for any of them to be invited to really go to some of these spaces was the best way. I remember one time we were doing some climate change programming in Kenya, and we had visits to Makueni by the British Parliament. A number of them were brought, and it really had a lot of impact in how much climate financing was being done to some programs that we were doing. So I think one way of really getting that done is to frequently get them on board. The second question about the transfer, and we have been asking, like the last time we had a long crisis in Kenya where 5 rainy seasons failed. The question was, how many cycles does a family need to be able to really, and that's, unless we put that into a study and be able to bring that evidence to the table, then we'll not be able to really explain. So some households were getting resources for the first 3 months, others up to 7 months, and some of the low groups got up to 11 months. And the question we asked was, while we were working with a number of international actors, was, can you help us do this macro kind of analysis across the region so that then we can understand what do we maximize on a lean season approach, or do we do this? So that kind of programming will be very critical again. Thank you.
Okay, from this side of the room. And Caroline, I'll know that you want to answer because you've turned on your video.
Okay, so I'll answer the question around financial inclusion and banking. So here's something from a financial services perspective really quickly, right? So financial inclusion sounds great, but banks don't make money on financial inclusion. They make money on financial health, and that is very different, right? So generally, financial institutions who are providing liquidity to the back-end technology providers, right, they don't make money when on payment transactions, right? They make money on credit and other types of loans. They make money on insurance and other services. So the first thing they're going to want to know is, how do we extend the work that we're doing with you into financial health for our future customers, right? Is there a way to turn that one transaction a month into a relationship that turns into a financial health conversation between ourselves and your aid recipient, right? So.
Okay, I'll answer although Gemma, I think you've basically covered that question, but perhaps just 2 or 3 additions about what exactly is the criticism. I think the criticism is really on 3 levels. It is first on the level that you mentioned, Gemma. There is in general the question, why should we have our own problems, and now anyway, defense, we have to spend more for defense, so therefore, where do we take the money? You have to take it from somewhere, so you take it from development aid and humanitarian aid. On one level lower, when it then comes to humanitarian aid that in Switzerland enjoys still broad support in Parliament, but the idea that I think the large majority of the population, including our parliamentarians, have about humanitarian aid is a very classical kind of, totally the emergency aid, and perhaps the tip of the iceberg is after an earthquake, you pull people out of the rubble. That is what, this is what, and everybody agrees, but that's what they see, and they see a very small piece of what we are doing, and they don't see all the other things. And then on the cash level, which is really speaking to your question, I think it's, it is a general skepticism about how cash is then being used by the beneficiaries of cash. The fear that cash is even more prone to corruption and diversion, which all, I mean, we know by now that evidence is showing exactly the opposite. But this is when you then once you come to that conversation, this is what you hear, and that is why I'm saying, let's not preach to ourselves. You all have constituencies, you all have neighbors, you all have factor, and we need to get the message out, all of us.
Okay, great. So we have a few other questions that came from online, and I'm just going to say we started a little late for those that are online. I know you might have like a meeting that's coming up on your Teams right now, but if you can stay, that would be great. For people in the room, we're in the way. For those that are not fasting, we're getting in the way of your lunch. So try to stay with us for a little bit. We'll do some more questions, and then we'll have the closing from Kate. So here's some questions. This question, the first one, it says specifically I'm sorry, something came up on my phone, for Gemma and Dominic, but I would say anyone who wants to answer. So the question is, how can we make sure that in the coming months we push for removing the barriers, donors to request unconditional cash as a baseline delivery, except if reason X or Y in a country? So how do we remove those barriers? And how can we leverage the new initiatives like the data collaboration to push for data sharing and deduplication to increase those percentages of multipurpose cash? And another question, which can be probably a little bit more broadly, apparently there's a lot of talk about linkages to social protection on the chat, which doesn't surprise me because there always is. But so questions, and specifically talking about local actors, but I think it can be more broadly to all actors. That, what are the barriers or the bottlenecks in relation to integration with social protection systems and to work more consistently with state-led systems? So maybe Ahmed and maybe Caroline or anyone else who wants to talk about that. So who wants to hit that first question? You go.
Yeah, so for the Kenyan setup, we are already working with the enhanced single registry model, and we also layering in on the social protection. So in the initial data that is provided, we go with it to the village, and in the village we do a validation process, and from there we look at whether the other criteria, because in some of the places where we are working, then maybe IPC4, and maybe there's a nutrition problem, then we layer in with the nutrition lens to be able to say, all those people in the social protection going to fit in with the community-based targeting. So definitely that's a direction. But the key aspect is ensuring that we are able to roll out the cash programming and other kinds of things from a shock responsive, plus also being able to reach there within the 3 to 7 days perspective. So we have tried it out, and it's functional as we go forward, but work in progress.
Awesome. Holly, maybe I could also add to that. So in the, as we're delivering cash, we also have to recognize that there will be instances where governments become an instrumental partner in how we are delivering cash. So depending on how it is structured, where you are located, and what data systems you want to use, the government single registries can become instrumental in delivering cash in the context that you're working in. And the conversation should not just be about humanitarian actors in the non-governmental sectors doing a people-first cash. We should be able to integrate these strategies with how we are doing it multi-sectorally with other interest parties, which we know government is a central stakeholder in the advancement of cash modalities and the policy instruments that will take us to the level where we want to get with multi-purpose cash or unconditional cash in that matter.
So maybe I'll pick up on that piece and then come back to the barriers piece. I think two things on this. One, where a government is capable, able, has social protection in place, please can we look at how we transition? Because, and many of you in the room have heard me say this, I'll say it again, I know it's not always popular. Most of the places that we work, let's look at the countries with humanitarian needs and response plans. That's what I deal with on a day-to-day basis, 21 today. Every single one of those has large parts of the country that are controlled by, influenced by, not just one non-state armed group, but many. And relying upon a government social safety net in those contexts is by and large impossible. So, where a government, like in Kenya, and Ahmed, I agree with you 100%, where a government has a social protection system that is there, that you can layer, fantastic, absolutely fantastic, but please, 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 let's be very realistic about the vast majority of the places that we work. These are places where either the government does not want to serve their own people, cannot serve their own people, or a combination of the two. And so saying that we're going to ideally rely upon a government structure in those settings is, I'm very sorry, for the most part, unrealistic. So let's get very realistic. Let's look at the exits where we can hand over to government systems, get governments to invest in their own people. I was at a social protection event last year, and one of the messages from Somalia, one of the front runners in this was also, that work is not necessarily popular domestically, the social protection work. So there's a whole set of pieces there, but my immediate appeal is where that is possible, please, yes, absolutely, but please let's be grounded in the fact that in most of the places where we have the worst crises, it's not government systems that are going to come to the rescue. Second one on the barriers, this one, Dominic, you touched on something earlier, and we saw it too, and I think we've got to be really honest about this. One of the reasons why we saw cash drop last year was it was cheaper, easier, quicker to cut a cash programming than it was to cut other parts of the programs. Now, if moving forward we want to be talking about really things like deduplication, and I look at the example of Ukraine is used often, right? $200 million that was saved when they actually did the real work around deduplication. $200 million, that is not a small amount of money. We're going to have to get open. We're going to have to get transparent to a level that we have not been and have not been willing to be, and we're going to have to be honest to a level that we've not been and not been willing to be. And there are good reasons for that, and some of those are very human. A lot of our jobs depend on the way that we currently run our programs, and we've just gone through extreme trauma as a sector, and it's not about us, it's about the people we serve, but we do have to understand the state that our sector is in. Nearly every person in this sector either thought they were losing their job or lost their job last year. And the thought of that again this year is going to be difficult to countenance. So opening up these discussions around deduplication, challenging ourselves on the way that we work, being more transparent, it's difficult right now. But we owe it to the people we serve, and we've got to keep that at the center of every conversation. So we're just going to have to force it. It relies upon, going back to Dominic's earlier point on making the case, I would say that equally on this piece. It relies on every one of us. Because if there's one operation where we can get this right, we can do it in more. And it relies upon a group of people being willing to open it up. So let's be willing. It's hard, and it's harder right now than ever because our level of fear, our level of concern is higher than ever. Our level of self-protection is higher than ever. Probably our level of competition is higher than ever. We've got to chart a way through that for the people we serve and hold ourselves accountable every day from an individual standpoint and from an organizational standpoint, but it is not going to be easy.
Wow. Okay. Well, we could ask lots of questions all day, but unfortunately, you probably have other things to do. So first of all, I want to thank the panelists who kept us on our toes and really have made us think about some things that we need to keep thinking about to keep us on our toes. I want to thank all of you who are online. I want to thank Caroline, who's online. And all of you in the room. This has been a really interesting and provocative panel, and it's not ending here. I fortunately don't have to summarize, but my director does. Kate, I think if you come up and sit next to Ahmed, because the microphones are working better that way. So Kate, we're going to leave it to you for some parting words and maybe a call to action.
Right. Thank you very much, Holly, and thanks very much, Holly, for chairing such an active and lively discussion. It's not always easy to make a panel discussion interactive and flow, and I think you did an incredible job, so thank you very much. Thank you to our panel. It's been great to reconnect with you. I've seen so many of you face-to-face, but new faces too. And most of all, thank you to everybody in the room and online that kind of joined us today. And I think part of a real kind of sense of a building momentum behind cash. And as many of the panel has said, please go out and keep talking about this and keep spreading the message in a sense. It would be impossible to summarize the points on the panel. So thankfully we'll have an output of this for all of you to listen to and to take those key points away. But maybe three themes that I guess came up and recurring through the contributions of the panel today. Firstly, the case for cash. And the case for cash is overwhelming, as I think Gemma and others point out. The evidence is so robust. And I think when I first started in this role about 18 months ago, I kind of was getting a bit shy. People would say, "We've heard it before. The case is clear. The evidence is clear. Please stop preaching a little bit, as Dominic was said, to the unconverted." But actually, where I sit right now is, yes, the case is clear, but the system's not always listening. So we're going to be unapologetic about keep making this case, about keep reiterating the data. But we need to tell that in a slightly different way too. We need to talk about not the case for cash, but the case for the outcomes that cash delivers. And in some of the conversations we've had this week as a team, we've really started to think about, okay, what are those outcomes? Cash is just a tool, and we need to get away from just talking about cash and really focusing on those outcomes and telling the stories around those outcomes. And just to tie this to the really difficult kind of context within which we're working today, and to the context in the Middle East, the most powerful story for me about cash that I've listened to over the last year has been a story from Gaza, from an interview with a recipient there, that basically said, in a context where I've had every single decision taken away from me, my life has been turned upside down, a cash transfer gives me a single element of control over my life, and that is powerful. So how can we tell those stories? Because they will connect, I think, with the people that we're trying to convince. So what are those powerful stories? And that, for me, has just stuck with me. And in the context of the Middle East right now, it is the thing that will resonate. The second thing then around beyond telling the story is this idea that locally led cash is really the holy grail. These four facts that Paul talked about, which I think we've all written down, local actors are absolutely key to navigating those four facts. They know the calendar, they know the needs of their communities, they know what's happening, they know the kind of context within which those households, Ahmed, are existing, they have the relationships with the financial service providers, all of those four things. Here's the answer. This is the interface that can really navigate those four things that we talked about in terms of how we do really good cash and do it really well. I think this idea that cash is really kind of that kind of real entry point for driving forward localization. It is, I think you had we can walk the talk on localization, Ahmed, I think what you said. Cash enables us to walk that talk. And I'd really like to dispel two myths. One is local national actors can deliver cash at scale. And here we have a great example. Sometimes we hear that, oh, we need to go to scale. The needs are overwhelming. But there are so many examples of national and local actors delivering at scale, being the most efficient providers and embedding that cash response in the local community and already in the kind of systems that are working within that community to build that resilience and respond to the crisis. So embedding our cash responses in the local communities, again, local and national actors are there to help us navigate those things. So really, really powerful, I think, in terms of thinking about locally led cash as that key driver for really making progress on the things that we talked about yesterday on transferring power, transferring resources, and kind of streamlining our systems. And again, I think we were reminded from the contribution from Yemen that, again, what's really exciting about cash for us is it is really reaching into difficult areas. So the hardest to reach areas, the needs where we are most critical. It's always striking to me, it's Afghanistan, it's Somalia, it's Myanmar, it's Yemen, it's Sudan in this last year where cash has really started to move. These are really, really difficult contexts, but cash is really, in some ways, the ultimate solution because of the innovation that's embedded in the modality. So, lots of stuff around there. Final thing at the barriers, there are many, and we've talked about them today. We've talked about the funding side of things. We've talked about the system, the incentives, the structures. But I think we are also seeing, I'm always an optimist, we are also seeing kind of how we can nudge those things forward, right? So we've seen about the progress we're making on HRPs, on common funds, on kind of more flexible funding, on really kind of, I guess, beginning to think about funding not to local and national actors as last mile providers. I really hate that terminology, but as first mile, front and center. So we are making progress, and I guess it's all collectively within our gift in this room to find where those barriers are for each of us and keep nudging forward and keep moving things as quickly as we can and really using innovation as well to drive forward on those things. So lots of stuff about telling the story, lots of really important messages about locally led cash and how it can really be that kind of at the forefront of driving forward some of the progress we want to see, practical examples of how we can tackle some of these barriers as well. And maybe then just to end is what I really love about cash and the work that we do as the CALP network is that it genuinely brings together all the different stakeholders that are involved in making that happen. So what we have on the panel is all of the, some of those constituencies that we all need to work collectively together to really take cash and ensure that, as Ahmed said, people's aid gets to people in need. But it is a collective effort. It does rely on the private sector, on the donors, on the UN agencies, and all of those, some of our other parts of the aid system, and of course, most importantly, on our local and national partners and actually reaching those communities most in need. And that's exciting because there are not always, I guess, agendas that bring together these different stakeholders and can harness the power of all of us. So with that, I'll end. Many thanks. We will keep going. We are making progress, and I think it's on all of us to keep driving this forward. So thank you very much, and we look forward to all your support in the years to come. Thank you very much.
When do you leave, Ahmed? Okay, I hope I get to see you.
I don't know, localization, clinical practice.
Okay. Okay. Maybe I'll try. Okay.
I'll send you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's all right. It's great. It's great. It's nice. Lively conversation. As usual. Yeah. Thank you so much. I'm sorry. I have to literally. It's great though, as usual. All right. Bye.
Hey,
Thank you. Great.
How are you?
Oh yeah. Really good. Yeah. It's very nice.